All right.
Oh, it's my friend Abdul.
Hi. Feel free to say hi to your friends that you see. Hi,
Hi,
everybody.
Ratana.
Welcome.
Hi.
As people trickle in, we're just going to take a minute to get people set up. But welcome, everybody. And you are muted. You will be muted. And if you have anything to ask either the artist or the curator or myself, feel free to put in the chats. But we will get started in just a minute because I know there are people who trickle in, you know, a little late. But I hope everyone is doing great. My name is Ing, and I am the founder of Pray Shadows Art Partners, and I'm currently based in Boston, but I do a lot of the work in New York, which is how I know Sara Raza and how I know Yuri Shimojo. And we have worked together in various capacities, but a lot of the work that I do is on strategic and marketing advisory for the art world. And I also represent Yuri, and we have works for art that she has put out in the world that are gorgeous, and they're on Artsy, which I can share with everybody later. And I also know Sara Raza, who is the former curator at the Guggenheim. And she and I are lifelong friends, really. We've known each other for about 20 years. So this is a beautiful occasion because right before the pandemic started, in early, like Armory Show week, I was doing a series of in real life studio visits in Yuri's studio and bringing people from the art world, collectors, friends, people that I know would be interested in her practice. And they would be very intimate because, as you will see, her studio is small, it's beautiful, it's a little sanctuary, but it's, it's not a wide open industrial loft space. So there were these intimate sessions where we would serve Japanese tea and plum wine, and she's just the most wonderful hostess. So everyone felt welcome, and it was always a beautiful time. And Sara was very, very lovely to come and participate in the very last one. And, obviously it was a great honor for us to have Sara there, as she's such an esteemed curator and has organized shows all over the world. And for Yuri, it was kind of an interesting moment because she had just started getting used to having people in her studio to really talk to her about her art. And she had always had a very private practice before. And so when Yuri and Sara made their connection and really started bonding over and this is what you will hear, this is kind of the continuation of what we started in early March. And I felt that now that we're all kind of quarantined and in this lockdown, this would be a beautiful way for us to continue to share Yuri's work with all of you, but also to hear the dialogue, because Sara, as a global curator, is very much attuned to Yuri's practice, which is also global and very spiritual. And they are going to go over 3 bodies of work today that we'll do through some screen sharing. And then they'll just have a conversation. So this will be about 30 minutes of conversation between mostly these two. I might interject or jump in every once in a while. And then we'll have about 10 minutes or 15 minutes at the end for questions from all of you. But I just want to thank all of you for coming, and this is being recorded, and this will be available to watch later if you like. And I am going to get started, actually. There's still people coming into the room, so I apologize because I'm trying to click them in as we do this. But maybe as I do that, Sara, do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
As you wish. Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Ing. Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us for this wonderful, intimate studio visit. So we have about 40 people, I assume, that have joined today. And it's a great pleasure. I met Yuri through Ing, as she mentioned. We've been friends for 20 or so years, and we often work with similar artists as well, and share a similar kind of trajectory in terms of looking at artists that adopt a non-Western practice. And in the case of Yuri, we met actually on the Chinese New Year. And, that's how we first met at a dinner party that Yng had organized. And I learned a little bit about your work that day because you gifted a work from a recent body of a recent series to Yng, and I was really intrigued about this practice. And you were telling us about your life in Japan and elsewhere as well, and how you arrived to New York. So it was really fascinating to sort of hear about your work, but then to see it was another matter, because the approach that you've taken is a sort of non-traditional approach to your practice, which was really refreshing and exciting. Most of you know me as a punk Orientalism as well as Sara Raza. And part of that practice looks at non-conformist ideas, and it looks at artists who have forged their own identity, forged their own path. It sort of looks at artists from former Soviet Union, the Asian side of that, but also Asia broader, who have sort of gone against tradition and norms and values to sort of forge their own identity, forge their own path. So this is what really drew me to Yuri as work. And when we did a recent studio visit, as Yng just mentioned, it was really, really fascinating to see somebody still approaching their practice in such a sort of renegade way. They were not thinking about the sort of constraints of the market or pandering to a particular sort of trend. It was really to, diverse and sort of think about a practice that beats to its own drum, which I really, really appreciated. And Yuri mentioned to me yesterday, she said, Sara, but you tend to work on political art and you work, within that vein. I said, yeah, political, but it doesn't have to be political with a capital P. It can be political with a small p. And that really sort of means the way in which an artist goes about his or her practice and how they choose to sort of identify what constitutes as political. So for us, it was a conversation about a small p of politics, and to think about how the practice itself can be subversive, how the methodologies that artists adopt within their studio practice can really go against many conventions. And that's what's really our crux of our conversations going to be sort of driven today. So I have said a little bit about our engagement, and I'd like to hear a little bit from Yuri now. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Hi, my name is Yuri Shimojo, and I'm nervous.
But we're all friends.
Yes. I mean, yes, I was just telling Yin earlier, somebody like, I used to be on TV show in Japan, and then, but I am nervous. I never have done something like this before in terms of my art. And what really means a lot about this to me is, so my background, yes, I've been making my own art since I remember, which means since I was a little girl, as everybody do. Most of all the children loves to draw, and I just haven't stopped since. But I always, drawing was very important for me in terms of communication, because my family, by the way, my family, when I talk about my profile, many times I indicate my family background is a samurai. And yes, I am the last descendant of the samurai, which means my ancestor were the clan which was rebellious samurais when the new government came in. So I think I have in my blood of the punk Orientalism, definitely. But so my ancestor and my family was sort of very strict for the tradition, but at the same time, my parents were very, very unconventional. My father was a dentist who wanted to be a vaudeville comedian, and my mother was a social butterfly. And I had a stepsister. She was mentally challenged. So I grew up in all these sort of characters, and I always observed those human psyches, human behavior. And I used to have a stuttering issue. I used to stutter when I was child. And so drawing was always only my sanctuary and only my way of communication with people. So that if I draw, I can talk what I want to say. So I think I'm still doing that. And can I just finish my introduction this way for now?
Oh, yeah. Well, we can move on to start looking at your body of work, Sumi and Shoe. And so I'm gonna share my screen. Everyone, just give me a second. But Sarah and Yuri will discuss that.
So thank you, Yng. So we're going to look at some of Yuri's work, particularly the first body that I saw, which was actually one of the pieces from which you gifted to Yng, correct?
Yes.
From this series, yes, which is where, and Sumi is ink, and Shoe is the cinnabar, the ink on the right, so it's corresponding with the colors.
Yes.
So Sumi is the dark ink and Shoe, yes, cinnabar is the red. So these, yes, are the two really interesting colors, and you're going to talk a little bit about the process. But before you start, it was really interesting because when I entered your studio, I said to you immediately, red and black are the colors of anarchy. And this is also in my logo as an intentional sort of idea. And when I saw that, immediately I was drawn to it. A lot of people think it's about anger, but it's not. It has so many more complex meanings. And really, it's a protagonist for you, you know, their characters. So I want you to talk a little bit about the significance of Sumi and Shoe, please.
Sure. So I have started this Sumi and Shoe black and red body of work since 2000. And that came from my fascination to ink, the Japanese ink. And I have practiced Japanese traditional dance, kabuki theater and no theater since I was 3 years old, because my grandmother was no chant practitioner, and which is very unusual as I grew up in Japan, which was 1970s, because everybody wanted to practice something about Western. And so those traditional colors are definitely in my background, but also because that time I started to live in abroad already, and I wanted to sort of go back to my own background. And I never studied actually a formal Japanese art or fine art period in my life. But as I said, I always love to draw. So I just kind of try to, play with those Japanese materials. Then I started to just go my own way, which is those famous sumie or those Japanese art. They don't really use this red color as I do, because in calligraphy world, teacher used to correct students' lines with this red. And also, you know, when you go to Japan, Shinto shrine or all kind of things, so those black and red are very significant color of this Japanese tradition. But as I started to share these works to other people, especially in New York, I started to realize everybody from different background started to engage these works from their own point of view, which means, oh, this looks so African, or oh, this looks so Hawaiian or Scandinavian, or you name it. So that fascinates me. Oh my God. So maybe the shape, but also these two primal colors indicate something to the human brain. And my sort of, at the end of the day, what I really want to wish is all humans are one. I mean, after all, it sounds kind of corny or maybe a fantasizing, but I want to believe in that way. So I want to prove with these two colors, and I want to keep doing this practice.
I think, Yuri, what is really interesting here, that this is, you know, in art historical terms, defined as non-objective painting. Because it doesn't, you know, hold a particular objective, you're not harnessing it that way. And also the embracing of abstraction is very clear here as well. But it was really interesting because rightly you said that people project. And a while ago, you mentioned that in Japan, at the time when you were practicing, starting your studio practice, there was a sort of shift towards Western ideas around embracing Western art historical. And that's interesting for me because I also decisively look East. And it was a decision for me when I was at Goldsmiths College, which most of you probably know is the birthplace of the young British artists. It's where Damien Hirst and others were sort of nurtured by Michael Craig Martin. And then they went on to become those big names as we understood them. And they came to the US through Sensation, through the exhibition Sensation and the collection of Charles Saatchi. That's your dog. No, it's okay. So as Yuri goes to sort the dog out, I will just continue and say that similar to, no worries.
I'm sorry.
You're back.
I'm sorry.
No, not at all. It's good to have a little commotion, okay?
Yes.
It's absolutely fine. And as I was saying, so I decisively looked east of, beyond Europe, so the eastern border, and not look at young British artists, kind of completely ignore what's going on around me. Similarly, you mentioned about Japan was very much embracing the Western aesthetic.
Right.
And for you to take this, but what most interests me is what you just said about this idea of human condition.
Yes,
or
human condition is a big part of my practice.
Yes, and
that
this sort
mystery.
Absolutely, and this idea of universality.
Yes.
Sort of, which goes beyond East, West, him, her, all of these sort of ideas.
Definitely.
Exactly, that embrace ideas around nature.
Yes, that's big thing. Yes, because
absolutely.
Those natures are our teachers. And then I remember when we connected, and we talked about spirituality,
yes.
East and West, but I believe in spirit of everything, in nature, and yes, that might come from Shintoism and animism, but I want to beyond those boundaries, and I want to go back to those human condition, how human psyche has evolved with those ideas over the histories.
Exactly, and I think to illustrate that, Ing, if we could go to the later works that deal with the seasonal theme, that would be sort of really interesting. Yes, this particular body of work. And, so here, Yuri will explain a little bit in depth, but it's based on the cherry blossom season. Yuri, please don't worry about the dog. This is natural. Natural condition.
Okay, yes, that's exactly.
As long as he's not like ripping your studio apart, then it's absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. Don't worry. Be calm. And so we just moved to this body of work to continue our discussion around the idea of nature. So I just mentioned to our audience today that this was inspired by the cherry blossom season.
Yes.
So please.
Oh God. So when I worked on this, I thought it's a sort of cliche for Japanese artists when, talk the cherry blossom as a motif. But because of that, I needed to do this. I painted those series. It's called Memento Mori, which means it's a Latin word about impermanence. And I started to paint this series after Japan tsunami earthquake, which was 2011 March. And that time I was going through my own transition and experiencing a lot of immortality. not only life, but also relationship and life.
Yes.
Then I was crying. Then I heard about the news that cherry blossom started to bloom from the debris. And that taught me so much about how strong the nature is and about the life cycle. So we are in this very historical moment right now, as of today. But I always see when something happens, I try to see this as a silver lining, and also what is this teaching to us. So this cherry blossom pieces are, I wanted to paint something about life, death, and birth. And it was my first body of work that I could face about immortality through families experience and all that kind through art.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a time passage. This indicates growth. So I did paint 5 works: death, birth, and this is in between. This is in between spirit. You could say that.
I was really drawn to these works,
This
and it
is
was
birth.
really interesting. Yes, I remember, because you could tell some of them are sort of allegorical as well in their style and approach. There was a very deep poetic sensibility in these works. And I saw, if you go back to the cherry blossom, please. And I remember when I saw this work, I thought they were like particles, supposed to be like atom. And I was really interested. Yeah, because I was telling you that although I work with contemporary art, I'm really interested in the ancient, and I'm really as a personal interested in Islamic science, and also interested in a lot of the pre-Islamic ideas that were in ancient Iran around nature, because before the Arabs came to convert us all to Islam, we were Zoroastrian. Those that didn't come from the descendants of.
So I remember we talked about the fascination of Silk Road.
Yes, that as well. And so for many ideas, I mean, most of you probably know that I'm both Iranian and Central Asian by ethnicity. And Central Asia has, it's at the crossroads, and particularly crossroads of Asia. So it's right sandwiched in between China, India, Iran, all these countries. So it takes from so many different elements. And the Silk Road has been a sort of connecting bridge between us. And I've always been drawn, I mean, most of my work, not only through the sort of Asian contemporary, but in general through friendships as well, to look at the idea of inter-Asia and sort of connections that exist and reside. And particularly like those relationships that Yng-Ru attest to, that are between China and Iran, and then also with ancient Japanese culture, and sort of looking at that idea of interconnectedness, but also thinking about it through sort of themes around nature, themes that are sort of not tied to any dogma necessarily. They're not dogmatic themes. Again, that idea of human condition is really important. But I was really, really drawn to this work, and I found it fascinating. Actually, for some reason, I was thinking of the Iranian artist Shirazeh Hoshareh. Some of you might know her work. She shows with Lehman Maupin Gallery here in New York and with Listen Gallery in London. And older generation Iranian artists, but making very, very similar sort of detailed, meditative paintings that are really sort of decisive in the way that she sort of works with this sort of method, and have this sort of scientific quasi like nature element that also reflect through this seasonal aspect.
Yes, so one of the important aspects that I'm very fascinated to talk with you about my work is, so as I said, I always like to draw, and I mean, with these years, I started to paint more about sort of came from my life, but also I don't know what what is coming out until it's finished. That means no concept is my concept. Then so when I revisit my work, I often understand, oh, okay, that was my mental state that time. But when I talk with you guys, I am so fascinated how you interpret this. So when you saw the similarity, some connection with those ancient Persian works, that fascinates me so much. And then I want to learn more about that. And that's one of the reasons, yes, this is why I am painting this, because I want to prove something. See, I didn't know that, but it's just a human nature. My background let me paint this body of work, and that must be, I mean, that might be something resonates with somebody in 300 years before in somewhere in Persia. That fascinates me so much.
You know, we talked about this before, but this idea of visual culture being alternative language, particularly, you know, when sometimes English isn't your first language. And then living in the dominant discourse, which is, I mean, English is what is spoken here in the Western world as a, you know, they call it the international language. The global language of the world is English. So it's according to BBC. I was watching something that said the global language is English. It's not, you know, despite the fact that French and Spanish and Arabic are widely spoken in the world, the dominant global language is still English. So if you can speak English, you can get by. But then this sort of third language, and we talked about this very interestingly in your studio as well, like not only third space, people like you and I who are, you know, who embrace and have multiple ethnicity, mixed ethnicity, but they live and work in the West. They sort of carve their own third space. But also what is interesting here was the visual language. And for me, when I saw this, and you said that you were just literally just drawing line, and the fact that it's called one unbroken line sort of signifies that it's something unfinished. Yes. It doesn't have this idea of stoppage and breaking, something that stops, impedes. It's sort of continuous. Similarly to the idea of the seasonal work, that it's a very performative gesture. And Yuri, I'd love you to say something about this and the process here.
Yes, so I started to this line series after I moved this apartment, which means after I had my own sanctuary. And first idea was I wanted to sort of step out from the circle, because I always painted those circles. People can call about mandala, or people can call about life cycle, whatever, but I loved circles, and it's a life force, and then it represented a lot about my way of thinking. But I wanted to try to get out from the circle, and which means could be no shape, but could be something eternity, not put it in the boundary. So this, and then also I mean, I used to paint more sort of emotional paintings. I used to, let's say, in abstract figures, but I thought sometimes the man got scared of my paintings because it's kind of intimidating. But because I was really wanted to paint something out from my life, which was drama. But then I wanted to start to paint something no drama, no story, no ego, no myself. But you know, it's actually, even if I draw just single lines, it's the only line that I created. So this is my line, although I sort of try not to illustrate my stories. And it's not I'm not trying to pursue perfection. Actually, I want to pursue imperfection, and but some kind of not rules, more like more like a rhythm.
Yeah.
And I like to sort of focus only the fact of dedication.
Mm-hmm.
That when I'm in this thin line, that's only time when I can be here, and I can say empty, but it's, yes, of course, it's a form of meditation, and that's why I mention a little bit about this shaker practice, or Indian tantric practice, or Buddhism Shakyo, which is copying sutra practice. And so again, it's beyond those religious rules. I kind of wanted to experience what's this, just focus on the dedication and just be here.
Mhm.
So after this, our self-isolation started, this line drawing started to more and more important for me, because that's when I always can go back to where I am. And why this is unbroken, why this is one, is I think this is one, my idea of longing for eternity. But there is no eternity. But I think I always experience this impermanence, family or relationship or places. So I guess this is my sort of dedication, not just prayers, but sort of my longing state of life.
Yeah. It was for me like a frequency as well. I said to you, I was saying that my father was an engineer. He studied physics and he used to analyze radio waves.
Wow.
And
yes.
I don't know why this, I said to you when we were in the studio, I said, this reminds me of this idea. And there's something really interesting in analysts who look at this radio waves, and the sort of scientists that explore it. They talk about the idea of fuzzy logic. Or there's like logic. Yeah, so it was really interesting as a sort of scientific concept. And I was telling you something about that, it was reminding me of that. But this more for me was also like your daily diary.
Yes, definitely. So I love to journal, and my journal, I journal since I was child, and my journal just started to more and more abstract, but that's it. And also this bad picture, because I haven't able to scan these works, but these are these are the actual one
behind you.
So I kept a little space up, on the top, and I think that sort of visual trick make people to see sort of like a landscaping.
Yes.
So could be horizon, could be some ocean. So it's just fascinating me to hear people sort of see some landscaping, but also I see that people are sort of seeing themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like people viewers reflect themselves in this sort of mirror.
Yes.
Well, I'm gonna stop here because we're at the 30-minute mark. But I guess one thing I wanted to say about this particular body of work is, you mentioned to me very early on that these are your biorhythms, because you know, and that really struck at me because, you know, you think of someone like Pollock who really thrust his body onto the canvas on the floor, but this is so different. It's really intricate. It's very light, but you can really see kind of like, you know, maybe those denser, deeper colors were when you were perhaps feeling a certain way, and, you know, but that starts some questions. I mean, how long do these paintings take you?
So it all depends.
Mm-hmm.
But if I really focus and not eating or something, I think I could just finish a week or something, could be. But I like to see, as again, as you said, my biorhythm too.
Mm-hmm.
So I leave it on the table and I go back and forth. So I remember I told you in the beginning when I started to, Yin, this is my Jackson Pollock.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So this is my way of, my way of recording.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, if anyone has questions, please put it in the chat or raise your hands virtually, and I'll try and unmute you. But thank you so much.
Yes, I saw some of my really, really special
Yeah,
friends.
I know this has been a great group of whenever. So this is the third in a very short series that I've done this week, featuring artists of Asian descent to try and, you know, just get these voices out there more. And with the help of Sara Raza, she's moderated one other panel. But I think, you know, one of the really essential parts of this whole series was looking at how non-monolithic, you know, Asian American and Asian artists are. And even though everyone seems to kind of carry some of their tributes or voices back to perhaps their origins, you know, but at the end of the day, everyone has this very universal practice. But I think more than anyone, it's really you, Yuri. You know, you're really looking at the universe. There's a question from Susan MB Chen, who we had a few days ago. Wonderful painter. Susan asks, are there any spiritual masters whom you follow or books on spirituality that you recommend? And thank you for sharing your story with us.
Thank you. And actually, no, but but I could say, I used to live in the jungle of Hawaii,
Mm-hmm.
where I learned so much from aunties and uncles.
Mm-hmm.
They are regular, ordinary peoples. They are not worshipped by mass,
Mm-hmm.
but they were my teachers and they were my spiritual leaders. And I learned a lot from those. That's when I talk about indigenous spiritualism.
Mm-hmm.
I have learned some practice from Kumu, means teachers,
Mm-hmm.
but they also taught me listen to your elders.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's my answer.
Mm-hmm. There was, I had a thought about, I don't know, the fact that you are, you know, out in you're in your studio, and I think a lot of artists during this time have felt obviously isolated, but you've actually felt incredibly productive during this time. And do you think that this is attributed to the fact that you had settled on this kind of practice and this, you know, I don't want to call it meditation, but something that really brought you to your inner self?
Yes, I am very sort of, I do appreciate to my lines.
Mm-hmm.
It's because I don't need to think any composition. I don't need to think anything, but that's why I started this. Yeah. It's just line. Mm-hmm. So of course I have other big ideas that are okay. I mean, it's actually it's going back to cherry blossom, but I heard this year when cherry blossom started to really bloom in Tokyo, when everybody wanted to go to ohanami, which means cherry blossom party. They had snow, which is so unusual. And again, it made me cry. Oh my God, human nature stopped people to go out. So, okay, I really want to have something, this idea that I want to paint about this. So I have ideas, but yes, we are still going back, ups and downs. So I couldn't really start it yet. Then I always go back to this line, which just allows me to be nothing, be just line. So I can be, say, productive, but at the same time, it's because of this.
Yeah. I'm going to add one more. I had one more thing I wanted to bring up, which was you have this really deep connection with, I guess what you would call outsider artists, and
thank you. Yes.
This is something that you and I have talked about a lot, but also, when we bring in some of these art masters from practices that are definitely never Western and are always, kind of considered spiritual, and this could be like Tantric or Shaker art, or any of these kind of indigenous artworks, and you've always felt very connected to it. And I think you've recently started to articulate that part of this is because of your childhood with your older half sister who was mentally disabled, but who really, you and her together, because of the craziness of your family, drawing together and making art together was your sanctuary. And when you went to the Outsider Art Fair, a few months ago, you just felt like, wow, you felt like it really hit home. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yes. So again, talking about punk Orientalism, one of the major thing I always being rebel was I didn't want to belong anywhere. So I didn't like school, and I didn't like to be categorized as something. And actually, before this practice, before my fine art practice, I used to be a commercial illustrator in Tokyo in whole 90s. And that's because I was drawing, and then people liked my work, and then I started to contribute something for them. But again, I wanted to get out from there. And the reason why I came to New York is, one was because of my family. All family passed away before I became 30, and I wanted to experience something more in the world. But also, I really like the rawness of New York City. And here, yes, it's good to be fitting in some category, but I see so many people from all over the world who didn't want to fit anywhere. And then I think this outsider art is, yes, my sister taught me how to be free through drawing, but also I think I just didn't want to be categorized anything. And then they are, when I look at them, no one has ever forced them to do or wanted them to do, but they just have to do. And then, yes, I think that in the beginning, all the fine artists started from there. But I guess we have many systems in the art world, which that's why I always wanted to avoid. But then now I'm learning a lot from you guys. So I am not totally against it, but at the same time, I'm so fascinated by that, outsider artist freedom.
Yeah. Well, and I think your rebelliousness when you were younger led to, your notoriety, which is what led to this book, which was, her her memoir. This is the second edition. If you read Japanese, you know, perhaps you already know this, but she published her memoir. So we have one last, yeah, we have one last question, and this is addressed to both Sara and Yuri. Could you both share a little more about how your practices may have had to change during this time, and if there are any takeaways you see fundamentally affecting how you work from now on? Sara, do you want to, I mean, has anything changed for you or shifted for you?
Of course, lockdown, that was the biggest shift. No, the shift has been, obviously, everything has either turned inwards, sort of more self-reflection, or it has taken a new turn. It's looking at like technology. Like I said to you the other day, you know, it used to be the very rigid sense of how we're working. We're working in Asia, we're working in Europe and North America. Now we're working in technology. So it's become like 3 different pathways. And I've looked at the world in a different way. And I have a lot of friends who work in this arena as well, that we don't just look at the world as East, West, but now it's East, West, and tech. So I think that vision has changed, but also it's just another way to sort of embrace things and think about how we're sort of thinking about our world. So that has definitely taken a sort of, conceptually, it was always 3 ways, third space. Now it's physically a third space as well. So that's something definitely new and fundamentally affecting everything going forward. Yuri?
I have actually not much, but definitely more assurance. I definitely this deep interconnection with nature. Human being cannot be selfish anymore, and that means, you know, we don't have time to talk about race, and we don't have time to divide ourselves. That our home is, I am not Greta Thunberg, but it made me to think about that more.
Yeah. You have your friend Hiroko Ishimori. Your art is getting more simple and more spiritual, and this is someone who has been following your art for more than 30 years. Did you have some big turning point?
Do you know me more than 30 years? Wow, thank you so much. Oh, is it? So, well, yes, I wanted to be more simplified. That means I wanted to focus what I really want to say. But these last 2 years, I changed a lot. I started to work on myself with psychoanalyst, and I still do. And I have my sort of almost permanent home here, and also in Kyoto. And I had been sort of such a bohemian life for many years. But I think I learned how to really focus how I really want to live if I die tomorrow. And I don't want to die tomorrow yet, but I am now 54. So I started to think about this seriously. So I think, but maybe, I don't know, maybe in 2 years, my painting started to go crazy, chaotic again. Who knows?
Yeah. Thank you so much for that question. Well, I'm going to conclude this because I think this has been a really beautiful session, and I am so appreciative of everybody who's participated. Yuri, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
I wish I could give these 2 women just the biggest, warmest hug, because, you know, they are vital to me as an individual, and I encourage everyone to learn more about both of them if you're interested. Yuri is.
I want to hug all these people here, and then you know, again, thank you, Yin and Sara.
Absolutely.
I mean, even my friends here didn't know what my art came from, because I never really talked like this before. So thank you so much for what? Yeah, like kicking my butt off to do this.
We kicked your butt. And I just wanted people to know that next week we are launching a sale on Artsy of some of Yuri's work, and she is going to be donating proceeds of that to Creative Growth, which is a beautiful organization in Oakland, California that works with disabled artists, and they are, you know, they've been around for 30-something years, and she just wanted to create something and create space in her work for that community. So I hope to be able to share that with all of you. And thank you, everybody. I will follow up with a recording of this, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Bye. Take care.